Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the annual general meeting for the College of Dental Hygienists of British Columbia to order. I'm Julie Akeroyd. I'm a public member and vice chair of the board, and I will be presiding over the meeting this evening. Thank you for attending this year's annual general meeting. We appreciate your participation and interest, and I trust you will find the meeting informative and hope it will increase your understanding of how the college operates. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge with humility and respect that we are meeting here today on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples, who have had a special relationship with this land since time immemorial. It is a privilege to conduct our important work from this traditional territory, and we thank them for this privilege. There will be 3 agenda items requiring motions tonight, and each one will be projected onto the screen. We encourage you to be an active participant in the process. The first order of business is adoption of the agenda for the year ending February 28th, 2019. I'll invite you to refer to the agenda, and I'd like to ask if there are any additions or deletions to the agenda. Hearing none, I'm going to call for a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. And a seconder? Thank you. Is there any discussion on this agenda item? Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the motion is carried. During tonight's business, motions will also be required for minutes of the last annual general meeting and adjournment. I'd now like to introduce the board and staff. We have with us tonight David McPherson, Chair. He's appointed to the board by the Minister of Health. And also present is Emily Chown, who, along with myself, have been appointed to the board by the Minister of Health. We have a number of elected members of the board: Lise Caven from the Vancouver Island Coast Electoral Region, Chelsea Mitchell from the Kootenays Electoral Region, Karen Lang from the Cariboo North Electoral Region, Wendy Kelly from the college's Okanagan Electoral Region, and from the Lower Mainland Electoral Region, we've got board members Ruth Lunn and Amber Aris. I would also like to introduce you to Jennifer Lawrence, Registrar, Heather Bigger, Deputy Registrar, and Janelle Snowden, Executive Office Manager. The next order of business is item 4, adoption of the minutes of October 25th, 2018. So I would like to ask for a motion to adopt the minutes of the October 25th, 2018 College of Dental Hygienists of British Columbia annual general meeting as circulated. I have a mover, thank you, and a seconder. Thank you. Any discussion on that item? Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the motion is carried. Next, I would like to invite David McPherson, Chair, to the podium to speak to attendees on behalf of the board.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the board of the College of Dental Hygienists of BC, welcome to the 2019 annual general meeting. It's great that you could join us tonight. As Julie said, I'm David McPherson. I'm the chair of the board, and I'm also a public representative. This past year has been a time of growth and change for both the college and for health regulation in BC. I'm very honored to continue to serve on this board as chair. As a board, we take the trust that the public puts in the dental hygiene profession very seriously, and we proudly point to the work of our quality assurance programs, inquiry and discipline procedures, and registration processes as proof of this commitment. We recognize that these 3 pillars of regulation ensure that dental hygienists in BC have the skills, knowledge, and professionalism throughout their careers to uphold the public's trust. As I said, the board is proud of the college's work and will continue to strive to enhance that work. We know that self-regulation is not a right, but a privilege, and always in the public interest. And I can tell you that the board bases every decision that we make on that priority. In March 2018, we introduced the college's new mission statement to fulfill our duty to protect the public through regulatory excellence. We believe that this statement gives better clarity about the role of the college and its duty to regulate the dental hygiene profession in the public interest. Through this process, the board also worked on a renewed strategic plan that was released at the 2018 Pacific Dental Conference, and I'd encourage you to have a look at that on our college website. The new strategic plan details more accurately how the college will continue to fulfill its mandate and engage with the public, registrants, and all stakeholders. The college continues to integrate cultural safety and humility in both policies and standards as part of our ongoing commitment to provide safe and competent care to the public. Now, as many of you already know, in March 2018, the Minister of Health initiated an inquiry into the College of Dental Surgeons of BC, as well as health regulation in BC as a whole. Mr. Harry Caton, one of the world's leading experts on health regulation, conducted that inquiry. Our registrar, Jennifer Lawrence, was pleased to be interviewed by Mr. Caton as part of that review. Mr. Caton's report was released on April the 11th, 2019, and the CDHCB board and staff have undertaken an in-depth review of the report, and we are embracing learning from its contents. On page 83 of the Caton report, it recommends a specific data set to be published by colleges. While the vast majority of the recommended data was already included in our annual report, I'm pleased that we have further enhanced this report to include the entire data set as recommended by Mr. Caton. This past year, the college achieved a new milestone, the acquisition of the new college office space at 388 Harbor Road in Victoria. Now, I can tell you this has been a very exciting development for the board and staff alike, and we are confident that this asset will provide long-term operational stability for the college. So in closing, I'd like to thank Jennifer for her commitment to the college and extend thanks to all the staff at the college for their hard work throughout the year. Personally, it never ceases to amaze me at how the staff works so diligently to ensure the college is able to fulfill its mandate of public safety. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David, for your comments. Next up, there are going to be 3 reports from various of our committees, and I'm going to call on the representatives of those committees to provide the reports. First of all, we have our registration committee, and Lise Caven will present on behalf of that committee.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. The registration committee meets in person or by teleconference at least 2 weeks before each board meeting. In 2018-2019, there were 2 in-person meetings and 4 teleconferences. The registration committee is responsible for granting registration to the College of Dental Hygienists of British Columbia. The committee must grant registration to every person who, in accordance with the provisions in the bylaws, applies for registration, satisfies the committee that he or she is qualified to be a registrant, and pays the required fees. In addition, the CDHBC hosted the Canadian Performance Examination in Dental Hygiene, the CPEDH, in the fall of 2018 for graduates of non-accredited programs and foreign-trained dental hygienists. 3 candidates challenged the exam. None of the candidates demonstrated competency on day 1 and were not permitted to challenge day 2. As of February 28 of 2019, the college had an overall increase of 259 registrants across 4 different registration categories, including 3,028 in the full, 368 in the full 365-day rule exempt, 82 in conditional, and 534 in non-practicing, for an overall total of 4,012 registrants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lise. Next, we have the Quality Assurance Committee, and Karen Lang will present on the report on behalf of the committee.
Thank you, Julie. Good evening, everyone. The Quality Assurance Committee is required to hold 3 in-person meetings per year, approximately 1 month before board meetings, as well as teleconferences when necessary. In 2018-19, the committee met 3 times in person and held 3 teleconference meetings. The QA committee recommended the redesign and redevelopment of the online learning plan for all college registrants. In 2018-19, the interpretation guideline on antibiotic premedication cardiac conditions was amended as a result of changes to the American Heart Association's guidelines for the management of patients with valvular heart disease. Additionally, 2 new interpretation guidelines were published: social media and fitness to practice. The guideline on social media was developed in response to the current digital culture and social media use trends within the profession. The committee continued to monitor and advise on the Quality Assurance Plan assessor process by providing oversight, feedback, and guidance regarding the directed learning for registrants in the QAP assessor stream. The committee also reviewed continuing competency credit requests and QAP deferral requests for registrants. And that concludes my report on behalf of the Quality Assurance Committee. Thank you.
Finally, we have the Inquiry Committee, and I'd like to introduce Amber Aris, who will present on behalf of the Inquiry Committee.
Good evening. A total of 11 new investigations took place in 2018-19, of which 2 were summarily dismissed as they were not in the college's jurisdiction to investigate. 1 was an employment issue, 1 was a retired RDH. 2 cases were carried over from the previous year, 1 for monitoring of terms of the consent order, and 1 in which a citation for a discipline hearing was issued and then rescinded when the case was resolved by a consent order. 3 cases were still ongoing at the end of the fiscal year. 5 cases were resolved by consent order, 2 of which were deemed serious in nature and required public notification. 1 case was investigated, but no further action was warranted. The Discipline Committee was not required to meet this year as the citation for a discipline hearing was rescinded when the case was resolved by a consent order. A copy of that order is posted on the college's website.
Thanks very much, Amber. Next, we have new business, and we are going to review the audited financial statements for 2018-2019. I'd like to inform attendees that the auditor's report and the audited financial statements for the 2018-2019 fiscal year is posted on the right-hand side of your viewing page. And I would like to invite Jennifer Lawrence, Registrar, to the podium to discuss the audited financial statements.
Thank you, Julie. Good evening, everybody. It is my pleasure to be back this year to discuss the audited financial statements. And as Julie mentioned, you do have access to those on your screen. This year, as our chair David had mentioned, we did acquire new office space in Victoria. And for that reason, I've actually invited, and the board has invited Doug DeBeck, from Lee & Sharp, who did our audited statements, to come and go through them with you because they're a little different than they have been in years past, and felt that it would be an asset to have him come. So if Doug, you wouldn't mind coming to the podium and taking us through the financial statements. Thank you.
I'm going to do a quick go-through of the main highlights of the statements. Obviously, they're quite long, and probably no one involved in this meeting wants to go through them in detail. So up on the screen, we see the audit report, rather, which, again, as it has been in previous years, is a clean, unqualified audit opinion. If we could scroll down to the next page. Thank you very much. This being the statement of operations, which is a summary of all the college's receipts and expenditures for the year. 12 months ended February 28th, and you can see the revenues were up a little bit as the aforementioned registration committee report reported on in terms of numbers. Expenses were also up. There were just increased costs. Down at the very bottom, though, you can see income from operations, a $24,000 surplus, so another year of in the black, as it were, operationally. If we could forward to the next page, this being the statement of financial position, which is a snapshot on midnight, February 28th, 2019, of the college's position in terms of assets and liabilities. As you can see, there are assets on the top consisting mainly of cash and investments. And as has been noted previously, the big line change on this one is about halfway down the page in capital assets. This is where the building and subsequent renovation thereof gets recorded on the financial statements. And previously in 2018, there were $101,000 of capital assets, and you can see as at the 2019 fiscal period, there was $1.9 million of capital assets recorded. The main increase, of course, being land and building purchased for the college's offices. That purchase was funded by the cash and investments on hand, and you can see just above the capital assets line, there's the internally restricted cash assets there that's gone down from 3.1 million to 1.2, and that's where the bulk of the funding for that purchase came out. There was no debt incurred for the purchase of the building. Other than that, I won't go through the notes of the financial statements unless there are any specific questions, but those are the main highlights of the audited financial statements for 2019. Super. Yeah. Heather's just requested, we mentioned the documents can be downloaded from the website for better viewing if you're having trouble seeing what's on the presentation.
So yes, they are in the annual report that is available on our website, and the easiest way is just to go up to the search tool at the very top of our website and type in annual report, and you should see the annual report for 2018-19, and the documents are therein. We're just going to kind of pause and look awkwardly at the camera to give people time to type any questions, because we know that there may be some questions related to the financial statements. And in years past, we don't maybe give enough time for people to type. So we'll just stand here looking pleasant while people have an opportunity.
So we do have one question just to confirm. That question is from Maureen asking if the CDHBC purchased the building.
So we did not purchase the entire building. It is a 3-story building on Harbour Road in Victoria. We purchased the top floor in its entirety, but it is a strata building, so we own the top floor. The other floors are owned obviously by others. But we do own it outright. The space we occupy is, I guess, the best way to put that.
And another question, this one's from MH. Now that the funds we've saved for the building and it's been purchased, will the fees for registration and renewal go down?
Thank you. I can't predispose what the board will decide in terms of setting the fees. It is the board's responsibility to set fees. However, as I've said in years past, it would not be financially prudent to offset annual operating costs with investment funds. Those are meant to be used for a one-time use only. They are not meant to subsidize the normally incurred operating costs. So I don't project that the board would make that decision. And I think it's important to note that we've made a lot of strides, and I will get into this in my presentation following the AGM, in terms of improvements around things like software and other services that we provide to our registrants, and we've been able to do that while keeping registration fees relatively static, and that's because we are able to pay for some of these improvements as they're one-time improvements through the reserve funds. The other piece to consider is discipline hearings are always a possibility. We've been fortunate enough not to have too many of those, but they can be incredibly costly and they can ramp up very quickly into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And certainly we would want to ensure we retain a healthy reserve to offset those costs so that we aren't in a position of, say, having to incur a special levy on registrants to offset a very expensive discipline hearing.
And we do have an additional couple of questions if we still have time. Just because the statements are a little bit difficult for people to read, there was a question about where the cash came from for the building purchase. If you can speak to that, please.
Sure. The cash was funded entirely from cash on hand, and the bulk of that came from right under the long-term heading, internally restricted assets. That's cash and investments. And if you want to dig a little deeper, you can actually go into the notes to the financial statement. Note 5 of the financial statements details the makeup of those investments, and you can see mainly it came from the money market funds, which had a balance of $2.2 million, as at the end of 2018, and it's $200,000 from the at the end of 2019. So from cash on hand and investments is the short answer there.
Probably the longer answer is if the question is where do we get the money? Where do we get that cash from? So that has been invested over years of being in the black and being fortunate to have surplus funds at the end of the year, and has been prudently invested by the board in various investments and secure investments. And really those funds grew during basically I think from about 2008 through to about 2012 mostly, when our registration numbers grew significantly, and we were left in a healthy financial position, and then that money was prudently invested at that time. So that's the longer answer, I guess.
Perfect, thank you. And we have another question. If you could just speak to the strata fees annually. Is that something that you're able to give us a number on?
Sure. This is obviously the statement of operations from the prior year, but you will still see that there is building occupancy as a line item in the budget. And so that building occupancy would entail both the strata fees as well as things like taxes and hydro and all those things. Just because we own, unfortunately, does not mean we don't still pay to occupy the space. And so I can't specifically recall the exact monthly strata fees other than it is budgeted for. And that line item you will see next year when we present the financial statements look lower than it has in the past, because it is still less expensive to occupy the space now that we own it than our previous leased space. So there is a small savings. It's not as grand as one might assume, but there is a savings. So to kind of restate that, you will see in the operating statement under the expenses that building occupancy is still a line item. So simply there is obviously costs associated with being in an office, regardless if you own or lease. So things like strata, property taxes, hydro, other maintenance issues would show up there. So I can't recall the exact amount of strata that we pay per month. But you will see over time that that line item will look lower, because while there is still fees associated with the office space, they do not, there will be a cost savings, maybe not as much as one would think initially, but we will see some cost savings over when we leased our space the last time.
Doug, you answered the question about where the cash came from for the building purchase. Maybe just a quick recap on that.
Sure. If we could just forward to the next page, thank you very much, of the financial statement. So I'm looking at the statement of financial position. The question is, where did the cash come from to purchase the building? And the answer is it was all cash and investments on hand. So if you look under the long-term heading there, there's a heading called, internally restricted assets. And that mainly was money market funds and other investments that were used for the purchase of the building. And you can also dig further if you want to see the makeup of what those funds exactly were into note 5 of the financial statements, and that provides more of a breakdown for the differential between what made up those investments 2018 versus 2019.
And then I can provide additional context of, okay, well, where did the cash actually come from? So that was registrant fees that were in excess over expenses in prior years, more specifically sort of 2008 through to about 2011, 2012, when our registration numbers increased quite dramatically, and we were able to prudently put the excess cash over disbursements into investments and reserve funds, and that's where the cash actually came from, if that was more the question.
Thank you very much. Another question here coming in from Irene. There seems to be a significant increase in wages and benefits from 2018 to 2019. Are you able to clarify why this increase shows up?
I'm not sure I would characterize about a 90,000 difference a significant increase. Obviously, we are competitive and a fair employer in terms of wages and benefits. So certainly we honor and respect our staff through competitive wages and benefits and making the appropriate adjustments. We also have added an additional staff person, or at least added additional hours to our staffing complement as the workload increases. You heard in the registration report that our registration numbers are increasing. We are now over the 4,000 mark, and so it's important that we keep pace with that. So, while I know that 90,000 may seem like a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, that's probably one FTE, and that wouldn't even account for any potential increases that the existing staff would receive.
So we have a question again from MH. If the savings per year are not a lot now that we have bought the building, why would we not keep the $2 million and benefit from interest rather than buying?
I guess it's a philosophical question around investments in cash versus investments in property and more firm assets. We felt that, we were leasing, which is, renting, instead of, having an asset that the college could rely on for its operations for the long term. And the board, and I am speaking a little bit for the board, but the board felt that that was a more prudent use of funds at this time, and a more appropriate investment instead of having all the college assets in cash. One more.
All right, here's the last question, and we'll let you move on. The question comes in from Holly again. Does the board set the staff wages?
No, staff wages are set by the registrar. The registrar is responsible for the daily operations of the college. The board sets the overall budget, so they would set the various line items and agree to the various line items, but they are not involved in individual expenditures, which would include staff salaries. All right. Great questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jen and Doug, and in particular, Doug, thank you for adding that clarity for our registrants. We really appreciate it. As the meeting is nearing to a close, I would just like to send out a quick reminder to all attendees to please be sure that you've signed the attendance sheet, which can be found just inside the entrance door. I would also like to announce that following adjournment of this meeting, Jennifer Lawrence will present a current issues session. So if you want to stick around, Jen will be answering questions and providing some further information. I'd also like to ask if there are any other announcements from attendees. And hearing none, I will then move on to adjourn the meeting. So I would like to ask for a motion to adjourn, please. And a seconder? Thank you. The 2018-2019 Annual General Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.